High school scars never fade easily, but sometimes the ones you mocked return stronger than ever. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. High school corridors always carried a particular smell: floor polish, sweat, and the faint sweetness of cheap perfume that clung to the walls long after the final bell rang. For most students, those hallways were simply a place between classes, a blur of voices and lockers slamming shut. But for Simone Wilson, they were a battlefield. Every step meant risk. Every corner held the possibility of laughter cutting her like glass. She was never just another teenager trying to fit in. She was the target. Her dark skin, her full lips, her natural curls, all of it became weapons in the mouths of her classmates. Ugly. Monkey. Beast. The words weren't whispered behind her back. They were shouted loud enough to echo down the hallway, loud enough for teachers to hear. And yet the teachers looked away, pretending they hadn't noticed. The cafeteria was the worst. Simone would take her tray, head lowered, and slip toward the edge of the room, praying no one would notice. But someone always did. "Don't sit too close," one boy said once, smirking at his friends. "Her ugly might rub off." The words hung in the air for just a second before the entire table exploded into cruel laughter. Simone forced herself to sit, back stiff, throat tight, while her food sat untouched. She chewed slowly, swallowing not food but shame, as if every bite carried the echo of their jeers. At 17, she carried herself like someone trying to disappear. Shoulders tucked in, eyes glued to the floor, her body folded inward in hopes that shrinking might protect her from the next insult. But it never worked. The comments always found her. Sometimes it was a group of girls near the lockers who wrinkled their noses and said, "Why does she even try?" Sometimes it was a group of boys in the gym bleachers who made animal sounds when she passed. No one defended her. Friends she had tried to make drifted away the moment the teasing became too much. No one wanted to be caught in the line of fire, so Simone was left alone, sitting at the edge of rooms like a shadow. She stopped raising her hand in class. She stopped trying to join conversations. She stopped expecting kindness. And yet, deep inside, something else was forming. She noticed things others didn't. She saw how the same girls who mocked her lined up at the bathroom mirror, layering on makeup like masks, desperate to look like each other. She saw how the boys who laughed the loudest were often the ones whose eyes lingered on her when they thought no one was watching. She recognized their cruelty wasn't born of truth, it was born of fear. But at 17, that knowledge was only a flicker. The pain was heavier than the spark. School photos told the story best. Every picture showed her with the same forced smile, chin lowered as though bracing for impact, eyes hollow as if begging the camera not to reveal too much. Those pictures followed her home, slipped into yearbooks she didn't want to open, reminders of a chapter she couldn't escape. At night, lying in her small bedroom with posters of singers she admired taped to the wall, Simone would stare at the ceiling and wonder why. Why wasn't she enough? Why was beauty something reserved for everyone else? Why did her reflection feel like a curse rather than a blessing? The ceiling never answered, but the silence pressed against her like another kind of ridicule. Her mother would sometimes knock on the door, leave a plate of food on the dresser, and tell her, "You're stronger than you know." But even her mother's encouragement couldn't erase the weight of the day. Simone swallowed those words the way she swallowed the insults, quietly, carefully, until they dissolved inside her where no one could see. Pain leaves marks deeper than bruises. And for Simone, the marks were etched into her bones. Teachers ignored it. Administrators brushed off complaints. "Kids will be kids," they said, as though cruelty was natural, as though her suffering was a rite of passage she had no choice but to endure. And so the cycle continued. day after day, week after week, until the rhythm of bullying became as predictable as the ringing of the school bell. But something inside her refused to die. She carried her notebook everywhere, filling pages with sketches, ideas, fragments of poetry she never showed anyone. On those pages, she allowed herself to imagine a world where she wasn't invisible or mocked, a world where she stood tall, unafraid, radiant. It was only ink, only words, but it was hers, untouched by their laughter. And sometimes, when the cruelty became too much, she clung to that secret fire. She reminded herself that broken pieces could still build something new, that scars might one day become the soil where strength could grow. But in the moment, in those high school years, she was still the girl no one defended. The girl whose footsteps echoed down hostile hallways. The girl who held her breath during lunch, who prayed for invisibility, who learned too young how cruel people could be. Her classmates thought they had defined her forever. They thought their words would cling to her like a permanent shadow. What they didn't know was that the shadow was only the beginning of her story. 10 years can turn a school into a rumor. Names fade to initials, faces collapse into yearbook poses, and the most vivid memories become a handful of scenes that play on loop. One afternoon in late spring, those scenes were resurrected by a simple notification. Lincoln High 2020 reunion, group created. Phones buzzed across town and far beyond it. On lunch breaks and late-night shifts, in quiet apartments and crowded houses, people who once shared hallways now shared a single thread. The icon was a faded photo of the front steps, the caption chirpy and bright, "Let's get everyone together." 10 years. The first handful of messages were predictable. Updates, emojis, jokes about hairlines and mortgages. Then the conversation stalled, hovering at the edge of something more intimate and less kind. It was Melissa Johnson who pushed it over. Melissa had been crowned prom queen in a glittering dress beneath a mirror ball ceiling, back when her smile felt like a guarantee. Tonight, it felt like careful performance. In her small rental, dishes sat in the sink, a cartoon murmured from a tablet on the couch, and a toddler's toys were scattered like landmines across the carpet. Mascara shadows pooled under Melissa's eyes. A long-stemmed glass sweated onto a coaster ringed with old stains. She scrolled through the new chat, trying to ignore the silence in her chest where applause once lived. Her thumbs hovered, then moved. Melissa J. Do you think Simone Wilson will come? 3 dots appeared and disappeared like baited hooks. Then the flood. Brianna L. Wow, there's a name. Kyle P. Dang, Simone. Blast from the past. Ashley R. She was something. Trent M. Something equals yikes, LOL. Melissa smirked at the screen, guilty heat rising in her neck. She wasn't thinking about high school spirit or old times. She was thinking about control, about how it felt to shape a room's attention with a single sentence, about how satisfying it was to say a name and have people lean forward. Across town, the glow of a single shop light cut a wedge through a garage stuffed with cardboard boxes and broken promises. Ryan Miller sat on a camping chair, the aluminum legs creaking beneath him. A banner from his failed startup, Swiftly, curled at the corners on a pegboard wall, the logo's smiling arrow now a sly reminder. The 3D printer he had once bragged about had a blanket of dust on it. The whiteboard's Series A scribble had turned into a ghostly film. He saw Melissa's message and grinned like a man who'd found a match at the base of a pile of kindling. Ryan M. We should definitely invite her. Ryan M. Imagine her face walking in. Ryan M. LMAO. He tossed his phone onto a cardboard box labeled taxes and leaned back, the chair wobbling. He told himself it was nostalgia. He told himself it was just a joke. But the truth sat quietly behind his teeth. There was relief in aiming at someone else. The chat sped up, that particular high that comes from shared meanness, dressed up as reunion banter. Brianna L. OMG, remember that one yearbook pic? Kyle P. The one where she looked like she wanted to quit life. Ashley R. Stop, P. Ashley R. But, yeah, LOL. Melissa took another sip of wine and typed, fingers quick, voice honey-sweet in print. Melissa J. We should absolutely invite her. Melissa J. Be inclusive. Melissa J. Everyone should feel welcome. The hypocrisy tasted like sugar on her tongue. She watched the hearts tick up next to her message and felt the old familiarity, the sense that the crowd had chosen a direction, and she was at the front of it. Not everyone jumped in with both feet. A few cautious posts tried to tug the steering wheel. Evan S. Let's just keep it chill, guys. We're grown now. Jenna P. Maybe we don't make it weird. Their messages sank beneath the current almost instantly. Trent M. Come on, it's a reunion. We roast. It's tradition. Brianna L. Low-key curious what she looks like now, though. Ryan M. Same. Ryan M. But like, we're invited, right? In her living room, Melissa watched the thread cycle through cruelty and conscience, like a tide she'd seen 1,000 times. On the couch, her toddler stirred and rolled over, the cartoon's sound dipping to a whisper. Outside, a siren wailed down an avenue. Inside, the chat primed itself for a show. Ryan propped his feet on a milk crate and let his mind edit the night in advance. The doors opening, the gasps, the exchanged looks, the private jokes texted under tables. He fired off another volley. Ryan M. We should make it, like, special. Ryan M. Front row seat for her. Ryan M. VIP. A laughing, crying emoji pile skidded across the screen. He laughed for real, the sound bouncing back at him from the garage door. The echo felt cheap and hollow. More names popped up, old roles slipping over present-day bodies, the ex-cheer captain hyping the playlist, the former linebacker turning every gentle nudge into a dare, the debate kid offering a neutral, let's not be petty, that read like a speech no one wanted to hear. Beneath the fireworks of the thread, people sat alone with their lives, quietly taking inventory. Brianna thought about the overtime she'd been promised that didn't materialize. Trent scrolled past a Venmo reminder with a knot in his stomach. Jenna's engagement ring lay in a dish by the sink because her fingers had started swelling from stress. None of that made it into the chat. This was a stage, and the script was easier than the truth. The question returned, heavier now. Melissa J. So who's messaging Simone? Silence, then the usual dance of avoidance. Jokes, side comments, a GIF of someone vanishing in a puff of smoke. Melissa exhaled through her nose, a smile tightening at the corners. If you want something done right. She opened Simone's contact. The name sat there like a dare. She had added the number years ago during some group project logistics, and it had survived every phone upgrade like a fossil. Melissa stared at the blank message field, rehearsing tone in her head. Friendly, but not desperate. Warm, but not personal. The kind of note that would sound generous to anyone else, and like a trap to the person who knew the past. Her first draft came out smug. She erased it. The second read like a press release. Delete. The third landed with the lightness of a feather and the weight of a stone. Hey, Simone, it's Melissa Johnson from Lincoln High. We're putting together the 10-year reunion and would love to see you there. It would mean a lot to have everyone represented. Hope you're well." She let her thumb hover over send and felt a flicker of something she didn't intend. Nerves. Beneath the performance and the practiced ease, some small animal inside her knew the risk of waking old ghosts. She looked at her reflection in the blackness of the window. The crown she never took off, the weight she never put down. Across the garage, Ryan's phone lit up again. He watched the typing bubble under Melissa's name and fired off a private message. Ryan to Melissa. "LOL, you actually doing it?" Melissa to Ryan. "Someone has to." He added, Ryan to Melissa. "Make it sound nice so she comes." Ryan to Melissa. "Gotta sell the nostalgia." Back in the main thread, the committee tone took hold, crisp and faux professional. Brianna L. "Yes, official invite feels better." Kyle P. "Less cease if it's from the organizers." Jenna P. "Please, don't be weird about it." Melissa reread her message to Simone, fixing a comma as if punctuation could cleanse intention. She attached the generic reunion graphic Brianna had just posted. Blue confetti, white serif font, the date floating like an afterthought. She imagined Simone seeing it. She imagined the reaction: surprise, embarrassment, maybe even gratitude. The power pulsed at her fingertips. She tapped send. Nothing happened, and then everything did. The whoosh, the message sliding up and settling into place. A small banner confirmed its flight. Delivered. In the reunion thread, Melissa played casual. Melissa J. sent a chorus of approvals. Ryan M. "Let's go." Trent M. "Showtime." Brianna L. "If she comes, I'm dead." Evan S. "Guys." The chat moved on to fonts and photo booths and the eternal argument about whether the DJ should take requests. But beneath the logistics, a single question thrummed like bass under a pop song. Would she say yes? Hours later, the city settled into its nighttime version of itself. In the rental, Melissa rinsed her glass and left it upside down on the drying rack like a promise to be better tomorrow. In the garage, Ryan flicked off the light and stood in the dim, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. Their phones rested face down on tables and boxes, screens still warm from the friction of deceit. On Simone's phone, Melissa's message waited quietly in a row of other notifications, promotions, reminders, one from a delivery app offering free fries. The preview showed enough to be unmistakable. "Hey Simone, it's Melissa in Johnson from Lincoln High." The rest hid behind ellipses like an old trap behind a new door. The reunion thread pinged again just before midnight. Brianna L. "Think she'll actually come?" Ryan M. "She will. They always do." Jenna P. "Not they. She has a name." No one responded to Jenna. The group had already curled back into the comfort of its collective smirk. Plans, formed in the half-light of their intentions, still formless enough to claim innocence, solid enough to feel inevitable. In the morning, there would be new messages, new angles, louder jokes. Tonight, there was only the quiet after a shot is called, the hush on the court before a ball leaves a hand. Melissa lay awake longer than she meant to, her thumb occasionally stirring the phone awake to check for dots that didn't appear. Ryan dreamed of doors opening and everyone looking at him, not because he had made something, but because he had started something. On the screen, the invitation remained what it had been from the moment Melissa typed it. Warm words wrapped around a cold intention, an old cruelty fluffed up as community. And somewhere between the sending and the answering, between memory and plan, the story pivoted, toward a night they thought they controlled and toward a return they could not imagine. They had asked their question. The rest would come. The night of the reunion arrived with more bravado than sincerity. The rented banquet hall smelled of polished wood floors and oversprayed perfume, layered over the sharp tang of spiked punch sloshed into plastic cups. String lights looped along the ceiling in an attempt at elegance, but the glow couldn't disguise the awkward seams of a space built for conferences, not nostalgia. A banner stretched across one wall, Lincoln High, 10 years strong. The exclamation point tried hard to feel like celebration. Old cliques formed almost immediately, like magnets snapping into place. The former cheerleaders, now mothers with restless toddlers left at home, gathered near the bar, their laughter a little too sharp, a little too rehearsed. They whispered critiques of one another's dresses with the same energy they once reserved for cafeteria gossip. Nearby, the former athletes slapped each other's backs too hard, bellies softening under shirts stretched tight, voices raised as if volume could disguise how far they'd fallen from Friday night glory. And threaded through all of it was a single current, buzzing beneath every conversation. Simone Wilson. The group chat had primed them, wound them tight like rubber bands stretched to the limit. Tonight was supposed to be the release. They weren't here for reconnection, they were here for theater. For the promise of a spectacle built on someone else's pain. At the bar, Melissa Johnson swirled her wine glass, the dark red liquid catching the light. Her hair had been curled, her makeup applied carefully, but the fatigue under her eyes was harder to hide. She leaned toward Brianna, lowering her voice just enough to suggest secrecy, but loud enough for others to overhear. "Do you think she'll actually show?" Brianna smirked, tugging at the neckline of her sequined dress. "Please, you saw the message. She'll come. People like her, people we made a name out of, they never say no." Melissa's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "I almost want to see her face when she walks in. Like she's stepping back into the cafeteria all over again." Behind them, Ryan Miller hovered near a table, stacked with finger foods, sipping his drink too quickly. He wore a blazer that had seen better days, shoulders hunched as though the fabric itself didn't quite fit. Still, his grin was wide when he caught the thread of Melissa's conversation. "She'll come," he said, loud enough for their circle to hear. "And when she does, it's going to be legendary." He tapped his phone screen, scrolling back through the old messages, as if the digital record of their cruelty could serve as proof of destiny. Laughter rippled through the group, brittle and hollow. The sound carried across the room, catching the attention of smaller circles. Heads turned, questions whispered. "Is she really coming?" one woman asked, her voice tinged with anticipation. "I heard, yes." "Got confirmation," another replied. "God, imagine what she looks like now," someone else added, smirking. The words hung like smoke, curling from corner to corner until the whole room seemed filled with it. Everywhere Simone's name passed, reactions followed. Some were eager, hungry for the past to repeat itself. Others were skeptical, unsure if it was cruelty or curiosity pulling them forward. And some were uneasy, eyes darting toward the doors with guilt stitched across their faces. But no one said it out loud. They had gathered here not just to celebrate 10 years, but to measure themselves against the girl they once dragged to the bottom. Melissa's glass tilted again, red staining the rim. She adjusted her dress, squared her shoulders, and glanced toward the entrance as though she could summon Simone by sheer will. "If she does walk in," she murmured, "let's make sure she knows exactly where she stands." Ryan chuckled, though the sound carried an edge. He had been rehearsing this moment in his head since the chat began, imagining the gasps, the whispers, the secret texts sent under tables as the past replayed itself. He wanted the spectacle not because it would make him powerful, but because it would remind him he wasn't the only one who had failed. That was the secret glue of the evening. Beneath the perfume, beneath the laughter, beneath the surface-level chatter about jobs and marriages and kids, there was desperation. None of them were living the lives they had promised themselves at 17. The reunion wasn't about celebrating who they'd become. It was about proving someone else had it worse. And in Simone, they thought they still had their scapegoat. Near the DJ booth, Kyle Peterson leaned against a speaker, cracking open a beer. He'd aged the way milk does, sour and quick, but his grin was the same as it had been in high school. Wide, cocky, careless. He looked over at Ryan and Melissa and smirked. "You know what's funny?" he said, loud enough to cut through the music. "We've been talking about her all night, but what if she doesn't even come?" Wouldn't that be the real joke? A few people laughed, but it was nervous laughter this time, a sharp edge of unease threading through it. "Don't worry," Melissa snapped, setting her glass down with a clink. "She'll come. People like her don't get to say no to us." The words dropped heavy, clanging against the air. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, eyes sliding away. But the expectation had been set. Every glance toward the door was a test. Every lull in conversation was a pause, waiting for heels to strike the polished floor. Every whisper carried the same current. Simone is coming. And though they didn't know it yet, the show they thought they were preparing wasn't the one they were going to get. Silence doesn't always arrive as absence. Sometimes it arrives like weather, rolling in quietly until everyone realizes they're standing in it. The banquet hall had been loud a minute earlier, a collage of clinking glass, canned laughter, and the DJ's recycled playlist washed in reverb. Then the double doors at the far end eased inward, and a hush began to gather, thin at first, then dense enough to press against the ribs. The first sound was heels, not hurried clicks, not tentative taps, measured strikes that found the polished floor with a confidence that turned heads before eyes had reason to look. The doors opened fully, and light from the foyer slid across the threshold like a fresh coat of paint. People shifted, recalibrating posture, smoothing dresses, straightening jackets, the reflex of a room that sensed a center entering it. She stepped through. For a breath, she was just silhouette, a figure framed by chandelier light, a line of shoulder and hip, an outline that gave the brain time to rehearse old labels. Then the light met her, and the rehearsal died on contact. Simone Wilson moved into the hall as if there had been a conversation before she arrived and she was merely resuming her point. The emerald silk of her dress skimmed like water along a shoreline. The fabric caught, then released the light with each step. Her hair fell in a glossy cascade, curls structured and soft at once, the kind of finish that doesn't happen by accident. The deep bronze of her skin glowed under the amber bulbs, not as something on display, but as something fully owned. No one recognized her immediately. The human brain loves its file cabinets. It searched a drawer labeled ugly, other, target, found a faded picture and reached for it, only to come up with air. Across the room, hands paused mid-toast. A laugh snapped in half and fell to the carpet. The DJ's hand hovered above the fader like a truce flag no one had asked for. Simone didn't rush. She let the space measure her and found it wanting. The rhythmic stride of her heels folded into the song's backbeat, and for a moment the room knew harmony. She didn't scan for allies or corners to disappear into. Her gaze moved at a steady pace, not at anyone so much as through them, the way a person looks when they learned long ago the difference between attention and belonging. She carried a small clutch in one hand, fingers relaxed. Her shoulders were set, not rigid with performance, not slouched with defense. A line drawn without apology. Near the bar, Melissa Johnson felt the stem of her glass slide in her grip. She didn't drop it. She simply forgot how to hold it the way a person forgets a lie when the truth walks in square in her face. Beside the finger foods, Ryan Miller's grin thinned into a vertical line, jaw shifting like he had bitten something with a shell. Conversations that had been about Simone, delicious, mean, effortless, began transforming into conversations about anything else. But the pivot was too late. The room had turned as one. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" And the question cracked like ice. A pair of former cheerleaders, sequins, practiced smiles, the same posture they'd used in formations, leaned in, pupils sharp with appraisal. "Did Kyle bring a model?" one murmured, the joke preloaded, ready to be fired. It never launched. Her friend's eyes narrowed. "Wait," she said, the word dragging out syllables, buying time for recognition. "Wait, look at her face." Midway back, a group of ex-teammates froze in their ritual backpat. The tallest of them blinked like a man waking from a decade-long nap. "I've seen her," he said to no one in particular. "Ads, maybe. Online." He sounded careful, as if he'd been asked the answer on a test he hadn't studied for. Simone crossed the carpet that split the room like a runway the planners hadn't intended. She wasn't performing. She was arriving. The shoulders of suits squared as she passed, the way trees straighten when wind changes. She didn't look for Melissa or Ryan, and yet she arrived in the center of their orbit, as if this were the only logical geometry. Recognition doesn't bloom evenly, it spreads like brush fire. It began in the far corner, where Jenna, whose conscience always arrived one message too late, clutched her phone and squinted. There it was, a memory of Main Street at rush hour, the way the traffic light always caught her one block early, the way her eyes had drifted up to the billboard above the donut shop out of boredom. The ad for a new cosmetics line, clean design, saturated color, a slogan about radiance that had felt less like an instruction and more like a promise. The model's face, poised and bright, had been familiar in a way Jenna couldn't place at the time. Now the memory slammed into the present like a door kicked open. "Oh my God," Jenna breathed. "It's her." She didn't mean it's that woman from the billboard. She meant it's Simone from homeroom. The names in her mind slid across each other, lock meeting key. She grabbed Brianna's forearm. "Look at the Main Street billboard, remember? The cosmetics campaign, that's her." Brianna's mouth began a smile and ended as a gap. She darted her eyes from Simone to some mental photograph and back again. The smirk she'd been wearing deflated, leaving her face strangely unarmored. "No way," she said, but the words had lost their momentum. They were denial, not certainty. Like sparks leaping fences, the realization vaults from cluster to cluster. A teacher's wife, dragged along for the sake of appearances, whispered into her husband's ear. He shook his head, blinked, and then forced a chuckle that fooled no one. A pair of guys who had once spent entire lunches inventing synonyms for ugly exchanged a glance, the reflex to snicker rising and then choking on itself. They kept their eyes trained on their drinks because the floor had become too clear. In the DJ booth, Kyle Peterson found his fingers hovering over a track change he suddenly couldn't justify. He looked up long enough to meet Simone's gaze from across the room and quickly looked down again. Recognition has a weight, and his wrists weren't ready for it. The air shifted. The temperature didn't change, but the atmosphere did, as if someone had opened a window inside everyone at once. The talk didn't end. It thinned. People stopped projecting their voices out into the room and started testing them against their own throats. In the pause between words, the history returned, uninvited, and took its seat. Simone paused a few steps past the midpoint, letting the room catch up to the fact of her arrival. She tilted her chin a fraction, not to present herself, but to breathe more space into the moment. Another step, another heartbeat. The chandelier light found the planes of her face and settled there like an oath fulfilled. Her presence did not ask to be witnessed. It imposed the responsibility to see. Back at the bar, Melissa's mind ran hot and then blank, then hot again, the way a computer does when someone opens too many tabs. She sifted frantically through memories that no longer aligned with the evidence in front of her. In her mind's eye, Simone remained the girl she'd learned to edit, shoulders rounded, book clutched too tight, smile rehearsed, and never believed. The woman crossing the room did not belong to Melissa's story. That narrative threw sparks and smoked out the edges as it tried to contain a larger truth and failed. The glass in Melissa's hand tilted. A dot of wine crept over the rim and bled down the stem, a red tear in the slow motion. Ryan steadied himself with a hand on the table. He could feel the night rewriting itself beyond his reach. The plan, if something as sloppy as malice deserves that word, had depended on sameness. It had relied on Simone arriving in the packaging they had stored her in. Instead, he found himself staring at a reality that would not shrink to fit. Someone near the front hissed, "Ask her to sign something," and the suggestion died before it could live, smothered by its own cringe. Two other guests murmured over each other, "She looks familiar." "No, like seriously, I've seen that exact face," and then stopped, embarrassed by the sounded-out awe in their voices. Simone's eyes moved across the floor the way light does, landing and lifting without clinging. People tried to intercept the look, to negotiate some private absolution with an expression that said, "I wasn't the worst of them, or I was only following." She did not offer judgments, and she did not offer rescues. She offered presence, which is more difficult to endure. A woman who'd practiced law long enough to recognize the exact second a case pivots felt a prickling along her scalp. This was that, an inflection point. A new exhibit had been entered into evidence, and the jury in everyone's skulls was scrambling. "Who invited her?" floated up from a table in the back, the tone torn between suspicion and awe. No one answered. The question was irrelevant. The door was open. The music faded, not all the way, not yet, but enough that every breath sounded recorded. In the slack of sound, the hall echoed with small betrayals, the scrape of a chair leg repositioned, the tin pop of a beer tab, the democratic clatter of ice settling in a glass. Time slowed to the pace of observation. And still, Simone did not hurry. She cut the distance in even measures, heel, toe, sway, silk, until she reached the informal center of the hall, the place where the carpet seam intersected the glow from the chandelier. It wasn't a stage, but it might as well have been. She stopped there, not because anyone had given her the spot, but because the room's geometry required it. She turned, letting the arc of her gaze sweep a clean circle. Some people straightened as if summoned to attention. Others folded in on themselves, making their bodies smaller in the universal language of wishing to vanish. The recognition that had been whisper a minute ago was now a presence at every elbow. It breathed with them. A cluster of 20-somethings, friends of friends who had come as dates or plus ones, blinked at each other, translating quickly. "That's the woman from the Aura Skin campaign," one said, and the others nodded, grateful for the anchor of a brand name to tie to a human being who'd just broken their script. Main Street's billboard glowed in all their minds at once. The shade names, the copy about light-meeting melanin, the confident face they'd looked at while braked in traffic. The leap from there to here was short and suddenly unavoidable. It became difficult to pretend indifference. People who had positioned themselves with a clear view of the door now found themselves pretending they'd been standing that way all along. The posture wore thin. Polite masks began to sweat. In a far corner, the school's former vice principal, invited by rote, stared in a way that betrayed how easy it had been then to catalog a child's pain as paperwork. His tongue pressed against a memory he couldn't swallow. He looked down at his hands and found them exactly where they had always been, useless. No one applauded. The instinct hovered, then thought better of itself. Applause would have converted the moment into ceremony, and ceremony would have let the room pretend it had planned for this. The truth was simpler and heavier. They had planned for an easy target. They had received a mirror. Simone's breath was steady, a metronome everyone could hear if they allowed it. She looked not past them, not above them, but through the distance they insisted on keeping, and the room felt, for a heartbeat, appropriately sized. She didn't smile yet. She didn't need to. There is a kind of authority that announces itself in the refusal to rush. At the bar, Melissa's throat worked. Her mind tried to draft a new script on the fly, something that could recast this entrance as a coincidence or, better yet, a triumph she could somehow co-own. The lines came out brittle and useless. She set her glass down and missed the coaster, the base ticking once against the table. On the rim, the smear of lipstick looked like a signature she wished she hadn't signed. Ryan found his reflection in the buffet's silver dome, warped, small, vaguely comic, and looked away. His private vision of the night had hinged on repetition. Same girl, same room, same rules. The variance was total. He put his phone in his pocket like a talisman and understood, with a clarity he didn't like, that no message he had sent could rewrite what everyone was seeing. Somewhere near the entrance, a nervous laugh tried to hatch and died in the shell. The door attendants, 2 venue staffers in matching blazers, did what people do when history shoulders past them. They stepped aside. No one asked the obvious questions out loud. What happened to her? How did she become this? Because asking would require admitting the assumption that she never could. Instead, the room asked quieter questions with posture and breath. Where do we put our eyes? Where do we put our hands? Simone supplied neither prompt nor rescue. Around the edges of the hall, the string lights seemed to dim and then regain their nerve. The chandelier hummed faintly. The DJ's screen reflected a square of green silk crossing the waveform of an old pop hit. The entire night, until this second, had been prelude disguised as main event. Recognition completed its circuit. It wasn't a single gasp. It was a settling, a collective acceptance that the story everyone had come prepared to tell had been replaced by the story unfolding in front of them. The laughter, cheap, easy, primed, didn't just stop, it lost its future. Jokes clattered to the floor before they were fully formed. In their place, something weightier took up residence, a suspension, a pause held on purpose. Simone stood in the center of it, unhurried, unbent. The room adjusted around her the way a crowd does when a train arrives, drawn forward and held back in the same breath. She lifted her chin a final fraction, enough to claim the air without taking more than was hers. The emerald silk settled, the heels stilled. The moment arranged itself, and in that stillness, before any word could be spoken, before any script could claim the scene, the reunion found its hinge. The night they had designed for spectacle had become something else entirely, and everyone present understood, even if they would not yet say it, the laughter had forfeited its place. The room was ready, not for performance, but for truth. It waited on her breath. For a breathless moment, the room held its posture around Simone like scaffolding around a finished building. Useful a minute ago, unnecessary now. She didn't raise a hand for silence. The silence was already hers. The DJ, sensing the gravity of a courtroom, dragged the volume down to a velvet thread, and even the ice and glasses seemed to learn restraint. Simone drew in a measured breath. She wasn't smiling yet. Her voice arrived low and steady, the kind that didn't compete with sound but reorganized it. "Some of you don't recognize me," she said, and a pulse moved through the room. "I don't blame you. Memory is convenient. It keeps what flatters it and forgets the rest." A cough in the back, a napkin smoothed flat. Melissa Johnson's fingers found each other and laced hard, knuckles blanching. Simone let her gaze travel, not pinning anyone, not offering refuge either. "I recognize you, though. Not your outfits, not the version of yourselves you brought for tonight. I recognize the laughter." She paused, and the quiet deepened. It had a way of finding me. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, in my yearbook. Somewhere near the bar, a chuckle tried to bloom and withered. She waited until even that ghost departed. "You gave me a name," Simone continued. "Ugly. Monkey." The words were plain in her mouth, unembellished, uncamouflaged. They hit the air and stayed there. Several heads dipped as if the syllables themselves had weight. "I carried those names home," she said. "I carried them into sleep. I carried them into the mirror. And, for a while, I believed them. That's the thing about repetition. It pretends to be truth." Her eyes moved past the DJ booth, past the banner crowning the wall. But repetition does not equal reality. It equals practice. Across the carpet, Ryan Miller's tongue pressed against the inside of his cheek until it hurt. Quotes from the group chat, his own, played in his head in a new, unflattering font. He stared at the tasteful chandeliers as if they might absolve him. Simone's chin lifted a fraction. Tonight was sold to me as a reunion, a chance to celebrate who we became. She let the words sink, then turned them gently. But the invitation I received read like a test. A test of whether the girl you targeted still existed, whether the script would still work. A ripple across the room, chairs shifted, throats cleared, a few eyes turned toward Melissa without moving their heads. Melissa felt the look, felt heat rise along her collarbone. In her mind, a simple line tried to assemble, "We were just being inclusive," and fell apart under its own cowardice. Simone didn't walk closer. She didn't need proximity to establish reach. "If you were expecting a performance," she said, "I'm afraid you miscast me. Because the thing about surviving a script is that you learn how to stop reading from it." She let a breath pass. When she spoke again, the register softened, not as compromise, but as a rival. "Here is the truth you didn't ask for. That laughter built me. It didn't break me, though it tried. It taught me where I ended and you began. It taught me silence isn't agreement." Her mouth curved, just enough to count. "It taught me to build a life where kindness is not a rumor." Behind the catering table, a server paused with a tray midair, eyes bright with a private yes. At the far end, Jenna folded her arms over her chest, not defensive, but as if holding something intact. No one clapped. No one dared convert the moment into entertainment. Simone looked up at the banner, Lincoln High, 10 years strong, and returned her gaze to the room. "You wanted to know who I became," she said. "You deserve to know." She let the sentence unspool cleanly. "I founded a company. We make products for skin like mine, for faces like mine, for girls who were told to shrink. We named it Aura Skin because sometimes light needs a better invitation." She said it without flourish, as if she were listing the day of the week. A stir. Recognition stitched faster now, connecting billboards to interviews to add rotations on people's phones while they waited for coffee. The image of Simone's face above Main Street gathered a new context and stood taller. "And since we're being honest," she added, "this hall, your tickets, your drinks, the music you've been talking over all night, was paid for by that company. She didn't look for the impact. She let the fact sit where it landed. Consider it my gift to the version of us that wanted better. Gasps, not theatrical but involuntary. Someone's glass clinked against the table as it set down too fast. In the second that followed, the architecture of the evening, the cheap bravado, the rehearsed jokes, quietly collapsed, like a set struck between acts. Simone did not gloat. She didn't tilt her head to study their regret or admire their discomfort. She let the revelation be a mirror, not a weapon. "If I wanted revenge," she said, "I could have written a different scene. I could have named names, listed dates, replayed the worst of it on a screen behind me." A few faces flinched. She spared them the indulgence. "But revenge keeps you tethered to the past. I prefer exits." She shifted, the emerald silk catching the soft light. "This is not a takedown. It's a correction. The story you kept telling about me was incomplete. I'm here to finish it." Her eyes found Melissa's, not to pin, not to punish, but to refuse denial its usual escape route. Melissa held the look a fraction too long and then looked down, the universal confession. In her chest, shame and relief crashed into each other, shame that the old game had been tried, relief that someone had ended it without demanding her destruction as proof. Ryan felt a sudden impulse to apologize, to run words into the center of the room and lay them at Simone's feet like a bribe. But apology, he understood dimly, if it arrived now, would be theater too. He stayed still and learned what silence can be besides complicity, listening. Simone took in the room one last time. "Some of you," she said, "were children trying on power and choosing cruelty because it fit off the rack. The line wasn't a dagger, it was a diagnosis. Some of you watched and did nothing. Some of you tried, quietly, to be kind and didn't know how to make that count." She eased a breath. "Wherever you fell on that spectrum, I hope you do better for the next kid who walks into a room you control." A murmur that wasn't quite assent and wasn't quite protest. People weren't accustomed to being asked for something they could actually give. Simone let the request land and root. "I won't be staying long," she said, not to provoke chase, but to honor boundaries. "I came to tell the truth in a room where lies felt easy." The DJ, half hypnotized, half terrified, reached for a crossfade and stopped, some animal instinct advising that the moment had a tail and should be allowed to swish without being stepped on. The chandelier's low hum was suddenly audible, the room tuned to it. A former linebacker, softer now, kinder around the eyes, lifted his chin. "Simone," he said, voice roughened by unused humility, "I didn't know." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." She met him with an honest nod. "Knowing is a choice," she said. "So is what you do next." Near the entrance, a pair of dates, outsiders to the history, watched with the alertness of people witnessing a story end in a way television rarely allows. One reached for the other's hand. The squeeze was quiet approval. Simone angled slightly toward the doors. "I'm not here to make you like me," she said. "I'm here to remind you that you never had the power to define me." The line did not soar. It settled like a conclusion rendered after due consideration. "I have work in the morning. I have a team. I have girls I promised to meet at a community center on Saturday to talk about interviews and lighting and how to stand in your own frame." She smiled, small and whole. "They matter more than any echo from these walls." The room exhaled in one long, careful breath. No one reached for a joke. No one attempted a selfie as proof of proximity to a moment they hadn't earned. A handful of people stepped aside without being asked, creating a natural aisle where there wasn't one. Melissa found her voice, quiet and unadorned. "Simone," she said, not "hey," not "girl," not any of the casual tethers, just a name given back with both hands. "Thank you for the sponsorship, for this." Her eyes shone with something complicated and useful. Simone acknowledged her with a calm that was neither absolution nor refusal. "Take care of the next one," she said. "That's how you thank me." Then she turned, and the heels that had announced her arrival announced her exit. Measured, sure, the sound of someone who knows she doesn't have to rush to prove she belongs. The doors opened as if they had been waiting all night for that movement. Light from the foyer poured in, and in that brief wash of brightness, the room saw itself. Faces unarmored, bodies relieved of old choreography. She stepped through, and the doors eased shut behind her with a soft hydraulic sigh. What remained wasn't silence, but a different kind of sound. Quiet conversation unclenched from cruelty. The careful beginnings of accountability spoken less like performance and more like intent. The banner looked smaller now, the exclamation point sheepish. People found each other in ones and twos. A few names were spoken in apology. A few phones opened to messages that started with, "I've been thinking." At the bar, Ryan slid his drink away. He didn't chase Melissa's gaze or wait for the group to offer him a new angle. He pocketed his hands and listened to the room grow a conscience it might keep. He thought briefly of the garage, the failed banner, the stories he'd told about why things hadn't worked. He considered trying a new one, the truth. Melissa, steadfastly present in the discomfort she had helped create, touched the banner's corner and let it go. Her lipstick on the rim of her glass looked loud. She found Jenna and said, "We need a different kind of committee." Jenna nodded once, grateful for a sentence that could be followed by action. The DJ, finally certain the spell had transformed rather than broken, let a slow track rise, nothing nostalgic, nothing that begged for sing-alongs, just a clean, unassuming melody that sounded like a beginning. A few people swayed without thinking, not to be seen but to feel the floor again. Outside, the night took Simone back without ceremony. She breathed air that hadn't been measured for her and slipped into the small privacy between streetlights. A car door opened somewhere, and the mundane grace of the world continued its work. Traffic, distant laughter from a patio, the blink of a crosswalk counting down. She didn't look back. The point of a hinge is that doors move. Inside, the reunion reinvented itself under a quieter banner. Not 10 years strong, but 10 years honest. It was not redemption. Redemption requires more than one good decision, but it was a start. People who had come for a show found themselves in a lesson. People who had come to measure their lives against someone else's misfortune left measuring by a different ruler. And the moral they would remember, because it had been demonstrated rather than declared, was simple enough to write on a hand and complex enough to spend a decade learning. The people you mock today may hold the power tomorrow, not because power is a throne to seize, but because dignity is a ground you cannot take from someone who has learned how to stand. The laughter that had once echoed like a weapon did not return. A quieter sound replaced it, the careful construction of better stories, one conversation at a time. Some stories don't need revenge. Dignity speaks louder than anything. If this story moved you, hit the like button, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories every week.